to remember about Koko is it's 100% Sauvignon Blanc. It is exactly the same vineyards. It's the same raw material that goes into Sauvignon Blanc. It's not a vineyard-specific wine. We don't really sort of grow it any differently. We decide which batches we're gonna pick for Koko the night before we pick it. Or sometimes we'll have a tank of Sauvignon Blanc juice, and half of it will go to Koko and half of it will go to Sauvignon Blanc. So it really is exactly the same sort of raw material. What is fundamentally different is how we make the wine. The first one you tried, the 2011 Sauvignon Blanc, is all 98% stainless steel fermented. Okay, so it's it's really just capturing the flavours from the vineyard, very clean, very pure. The Koko is no stainless steel fermentation; it's all fermented in old barrels. And by old barrels, I mean there is a small percentage of new oak. I lie. Old barrels look something like, you can sort of see them there, but there's another photo. No. Old barrels is sort of basically brown. Things you sort of might see in cognac or armagnac. They're all 225 litres. Yeah. So they range from about our oldest ones date back to 1986. Well, we've got one actually from 1986, but they date from about 5 to sort of 25 years old. A little bit of new oak just for the little bit of aromatic complexity, but it's actually very sort of subtle new oak percentage. So once the juice is in barrel, the fermentation takes place. Now this happens with is carried out by natural yeast. Okay, so wild yeast, indigenous yeast, there are many different names for them. So these are the yeast that naturally occur on the grape. If you've ever seen a bunch of grapes, particularly with red grapes, just prior to harvest, there's often like a fine white dust on them. They're actually yeast. Okay, several different strains of yeast. So it's these yeast that are going to be carrying out our fermentation. Now, what's interesting about a wild yeast fermentation, apart from the fact that you get some really crazy strains of yeast, some really different strains of yeast, you have always systematically more than one. Okay, if we add yeast, we add a very neutral yeast to the Sauvignon Blanc in tank, just to highlight sort of the vineyard flavours, the flavours that we find here. But when fermentation of Koko will actually involve several strains of yeast that kind of play this relay. They have different sensitivities to alcohol, so as the alcohol goes up, one strain will die, and the fermentation will be taken over by another strain. So we have a fermentation that is carried out by, we don't know, we don't analyse it every year, but I think we've found 6 or 7 different strains of yeast in a fermenting batch of Koko. So they all add their little sort of nuance and their little influence to the wine.